All right, welcome. Today we're diving into a source that gives a pretty provocative take on the war in Ukraine. The argument here is that this conflict is about way more than just territory. It's actually rewriting the rules of modern warfare, and the shockwaves are changing the entire global power structure. So let's get right into it.
So the core idea from this source is pretty simple, but it's a huge one. The very logic of how wars are fought on the ground is being completely flipped on its head. It's not about who's got the fanciest, most expensive tanks anymore. Instead, cheap, off-the-shelf drone technology is forcing everyone to tear up the old military playbook, and it's happening faster than the giant defense industry can even begin to keep up.
Okay, so what does this actually look like on the ground? Well, the source points to some very specific Russian innovations. And we're talking about a wild range of things here, from high-tech glide bombs on one end, all the way down to solutions that look incredibly crude, but are proving to be surprisingly effective.
And that brings us to this wild concept the source highlights: hedgehog armor. Seriously, forget complex radar systems or electronic warfare. This is about welding metal cages and bars onto tanks to create a physical shield. The idea is just brilliantly simple. You either snag the drone's propellers in the cage, or you force its warhead to detonate too far away from the tank's real armor to do critical damage.
And this slide just perfectly captures the whole idea of asymmetric warfare. On one side, you've got these incredibly expensive, technologically complex defense systems. And on the other, you have cheap welded steel spikes that you can make in a workshop. The source's point is, when a drone costs a tiny fraction of the tank it's attacking, the winner isn't necessarily the one with the fanciest gear, but the one who comes up with the most cost-effective fix.
So you've got these low-tech solutions popping up. How did the West react? Well, according to this analysis, the response from both Ukraine and its allies fell into a pretty predictable and maybe pretty slow cycle. The source breaks it down into this really clear pattern. First, these crude hedgehog cages show up, and they get mocked online, people calling them primitive. But then they actually start working, stopping drone attacks. So step 2, their success is sort of begrudgingly acknowledged. And finally, because designing some new high-tech countermeasure would take forever, Ukrainian and even some European forces reportedly just start copying the exact same solutions they were making fun of in the first place.
But look, this war isn't just being fought with tanks and drones. The source makes a big shift here, arguing that Russia's strategy goes way beyond the front lines, focusing on the immense pressure building up inside Ukraine.
And this number, minus 15 degrees Celsius, this is absolutely key. The source argues that Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy grid are deliberately timed to hit during these brutal, freezing winters. The whole point is to create not just a humanitarian crisis, but a political one too.
Yeah, and this is so much more than just turning the lights off. The analysis here is that when civilians have power for only a few hours a day, it grinds everything to a halt: communication, transportation, even basic government functions. The alleged goal here is to sow chaos and just push the population toward a breaking point from sheer exhaustion.
And to show this isn't just speculation, the source points to reporting from outlets like the New York Times. They highlight quotes from Ukrainians on the ground who are starting to feel like peace has to happen, no matter the cost, even if that means giving up territory. It's presented as direct evidence of that growing strain on the home front.
So all this pressure for peace, it obviously makes you wonder, what about negotiations? And this is where the source introduces a sharply different viewpoint on who's actually standing in the way, a view attributed to former U.S. President Donald Trump.
Exciting reporting from Reuters. The analysis brings up Trump's perspective, which is that Vladimir Putin is actually the one who's more ready to sit down and talk. Now that's a direct contradiction to the narrative we hear most often.
And here's the real punchline from the source material. It quotes Trump as saying that the main obstacle to peace isn't Putin at all, but Ukrainian President Zelensky. The reasoning given is that with all the pressure on him, both at home and from abroad, Zelensky can't politically afford to accept anything less than a total victory.
Okay, let's pull the camera way back now. The source argues that everything happening in Ukraine is just one piece of a much bigger geopolitical puzzle. We're talking about a fundamental redrawing of the world map, with old alliances shifting and new secret channels opening up.
So this table breaks down how the source connects all these dots. The argument goes something like this. The U.S. puts pressure on energy producers like Venezuela and Iran. What's the unintended consequence? It forces China to rely more and more on Russian energy.
And according to this analysis, that suddenly elevates Russia from being China's junior partner to an absolutely essential supplier, strengthening the whole anti-US bloc.
Then the analysis turns to a place you might not expect: Greenland. It's painted as this new flashpoint, but for tensions inside of NATO. The source claims that because of US security interests, European allies like France and Germany ran military exercises there. But here's the key detail: the United States wasn't included. The source frames this as a flashing red light, a clear sign of a growing divide in the alliance.
And just to really hammer home this point, the source includes this deeply sarcastic quote from Russia's Dmitry Medvedev. He's basically mocking Europe's ability to act without the US, suggesting you're totally powerless to stop American plans in Greenland. It's presented as a reflection of how Russia sees a fractured West.
And just when you think it can't get any more complex, the source drops one last geopolitical bombshell. It reports on a secret back channel between two historic enemies. It alleges that Russia has been playing mediator for Israel and Iran, helping them forge an understanding not to launch a first strike on each other. This paints a picture of Russia not just as a fighter in Ukraine, but as a central power broker in the Middle East.
So, after all that, what are we left with? This whole analysis really boils everything down to one massive question. In this new era of cheap drones and ridiculously fast innovation, who actually wins? Is it the side with the most advanced, most expensive technology? Or is it the side that can simply watch, learn, and adapt to the brutal realities of the battlefield faster than anyone else?